Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update from Sebastian Fitness Solutions.
What's up everybody, this is Sebastian from Sebastian Fitness Solutions and welcome to another episode of Muscle Masterclass. And in this masterclass, I'm going to cover a very popular muscle group that you guys have been wanting me to do a masterclass on for quite some time. And with this, I'm pretty much going to cover every major muscle group, at least the ones that you guys are interested in when it comes to lower body. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the quadriceps. So Muscle Masterclass, quadriceps. Check it out. Alright guys, so for those of you who are familiar with the Muscle Masterclass series and you've watched other episodes before, you all know the drill. But for those of you who are new to the series and this is your first episode, basically the format we're going to follow is we're going to first discuss the anatomy of the muscle itself, understand its origin, its insertion, get to know the muscle, the various parts within it if it has any, and then we would figure out through that we would understand the function of that muscle, meaning what it actually does when it works. And once we have that understanding, we will clearly know what exercise will train it or how to train it. And then we'll discuss more and more detail which exercise will be the best when it comes to training this particular muscle, right? So that's the format we're going to follow. Now what you see have over here is you have images on my computer screen which I'll be referring to. This is only for my reference. You guys may not be able to see it very clearly, but I'm going to have these images posted on the screen itself while I'm explaining it so you guys can understand to some degree. Okay, but for the most part it's just for me as a reference. Okay, so getting to the actual muscle, quadriceps femoris. Now, remember I mentioned in other videos how anatomy is nothing more than just another language. So, when you talk about quadriceps femoris, what does that name indicate? Quadricep or quad means four. So, four heads, you can say, four muscles or four heads, you can say. And femoris. Now, what does femoris sound like? The femur, right? So, the femur is the bone of the upper leg. Femoris being something sounding similar to that. So, the quadriceps femoris essentially means the four-headed muscle of the femur, right? So pretty simple to understand. That's the meaning behind it. Now, when you talk about the quadriceps femoris muscle itself, it has four heads within it, like the name suggests. And the four heads are vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, vastus medialis, and rectus femoris. Now, do not get intimidated by the names or how complex the names sound. They are actually very simple. We'll discuss each of them in detail. But those are the four heads that are part of the quadriceps group. Now, going into each individual head, we'll first talk about the vastus medialis or the vastus medius. Now, again, like I said, anatomy is a language. So, vastus itself, the literal meaning of vastus is great, and that has no real relevance to understanding the positioning or this muscle itself, but just a nomenclature. I'm not really sure why it's given, but vastus itself means great. Okay, so talking about the second part of the name, medialis or medius. What does that sound like? In anatomy, what does medial or medius sound like? Or what does it mean rather? It means closer to the body or closer to the midline of the body on the inside. That's essentially what it means. So vastus medialis or vastus medius is the muscle or the head of the quadricep that is towards the inside of the body or closer to the midline, right? So the inner part of your quadricep would be the vastus medialis. Okay, the name itself explains it. Now, the name is given for that particular reason. Now, does this muscle originate? So, we know that these muscles have to deal with the femur bone. So, each of these three that we're going to discuss originates at the femur. But where on the femur exactly? So, this muscle is on the medial side of the femur. So, it actually originates at the medial surface of the femur bone itself, right at the top somewhere, right? So, right here, you can see it's on the medial surface of the femur. Where does it insert? Now, not just this muscle, but in fact all the muscles we're going to discuss insert into a common point, which is called as a tibial tuberosity. The tibial means tibia, the bone or the bones of the lower leg. Tuberosity in the sense is a bump, okay? Just take it as a bump, what it means. So a bump on the tibia itself, but how does it get to this connection is actually through the means of certain other intermediate connections. So each of the muscle of the quadriceps actually insert into the tibial tuberosity via a connection, and the connection starts with a common quadriceps tendon where all four of these attach into, which itself, the quadriceps tendon attaches to the patella, that kneecap that we are familiar with, The patella has a connection to the tibial tuberosity via what's called as a patellar tendon. So the connection that the quadriceps group muscle has to the tibial tuberosity or to the tibia has to do with these intermediate connections it has in the middle, ranging from tendons as well as the patellar bone. Okay, just so you know. Now moving on to the next one, we've got the vastus intermedius. Again, intermedius, what does it sound like? Middle, right? Intermediate, right? So again, the muscle, the quadricep muscle that's right in the center, the middle between the three. Now where does it originate? It originates at the anterior and lateral surfaces, mostly in the anterior, a little bit on the lateral surface of the femur. Now again, we talked about the femur bone. The femur bone is a long bone, right? So it has a flat surface angled a little bit towards the side. And on that surface, at the frontal portion of it right here, and maybe a little bit to the lateral side also, that is where the fibers of the vastus intermediate originate, right? And then they run down and insert into the same point that I mentioned before, which is the tibial tuberosity via the intermediate connections that lead up to it, right? Moving to the third one, we've got the vastus lateralis. Now again, lateralis or lateral, what does it mean in anatomy? Lateral, outside or away from the midline of the body. So again, simple explanation to understand it, it's the muscle or the head of the quadricep that is on the outside, right? Now where does this originate? It originates at a point, or it's on the lateral part of the femur, but it's at the point which is called as a greater trochanter. And it sounds very complex, but essentially what it is, if you know, is that this is what the hip bone looks like, and you've got the femur that is right here, and it has like this bulbous head kind of thing on the outer portion of it, right? So that is the greater trochanter, and that is where the vastus lateralis originates. Okay, pretty simple, and inserts again at the same point like the other two. So these are three heads of the quadricep. Now the fourth head we're going to talk about is the rectus femoris. Now the rectus femoris, again, what does rectus mean? Femoris, we know, muscle related with the femur, fine. Rectus in the sense is vertical or straight, you know, like we talk about the rectus abdominals, right? So any muscle that's running dead center, that's straight like that, would be called rectus. So that's why it's called this way. And its origin is at a point. Now you've got the ilium, the hip bone right there. It has a crest. It has a portion called as the iliac spine, which is like this I don't know, little. You can say one sort of a ridge kind of thing right here, and on its anterior, meaning the front, and inferior, in the sense that it's on the lower portion of it, that portion of the iliac spine is where the rectus femoris originates. So when you see a name like the anterior inferior iliac spine, it's nothing more than just, if you break those words down, the anterior meaning front, inferior meaning lower, iliac spine is the location, of course, of that bone. You pretty much get it. It's not really as hard as it sounds, okay? And the insertion again is the same point like mentioned before. So we've talked about the origin and insertion of each of the four muscles. Now, when you understand muscles and the way they function, we know that in order to create movement, they work on a certain joint. When they work on a certain joint and they pull on it, they create movement. So what would happen if these muscles, when we discuss the medius, the intermedius, and the lateralis, they all originate at a fixed point. That's not going to move. It's on the surface of the femur. It's not going to move at all. What is going to move is they can actually control the tibia when they contract. So when these muscles, when the medius, when the intermedius, when the medialis, the intermedius, and the lateralis contract, what they'll do is they'll pull on the tibia via the connections that they have in between. So that is what they do. And when they pull the tibia, what will happen? Knee extension, right? So that is the function of these three, and in fact all four of the muscles. Knee extension is the primary function of the quadriceps group. The same thing with the rectus femoris. One of the functions it would do when it contracts is that it will assist in knee extension, okay, because of its connection to the tibia. So that is the primary function of the quadriceps group, and that is the only thing that these guys do, by the way. These three muscles do only that. However, the last muscle we talked about, which is the rectus femoris, actually does another function as well. This muscle actually inserts into the hip joint. It is not, originates at the hip joint. It is not originating at a point which cannot be moved or influenced. This can create movement at the hip as well, right? So not only is the rectus femoris going to perform knee extension, It is also going to assist or perform hip flexion as well. So by contracting, if you keep the knee stable and you contract this way, what will happen is you would pull the hip, you would pull the femur closer to the hip or the hip closer to the femur, and that is hip flexion, right? So that is what this rectus femoris muscle does. Now because this muscle acts on two joints and it creates movement on two joints right here, we've discussed this before, and this muscle is called as a biarticular muscle, right? So keep that in mind because it's going to be important later on. So out of the four hairs of the quadricep, which is the vastus lateralis, medialis, intermedius and the rectus femoris, all four of them perform knee extension. These three are monoarticular because they just perform that, and the rectus femoris muscle right here is biarticular because it performs knee extension and hip flexion. Okay, we clear with that? Right. So now that we understand the anatomy of the muscles and we understand the functions that they perform, when we talk about training the muscle, what would we do? We would train the muscle across its function, correct? You would require them to perform their functions while that function is loaded with resistance, which will make these muscles over time gain strength, correct? So which exercises will we use for the quadriceps? An exercise or any exercise that involves loaded knee extension. So we've got a whole list of exercises we can add in there, ranging from the king of all exercises, as we say, the squat. We've got the front squat, lunges, different versions of the squat, of course, lunges, step-ups, knee, leg presses, knee extensions, all these options we have available for training these muscles, right? Now this brings us to the question, which would be the best exercise to consider? Now let me tell one thing, and I've explained this numerous times before, and I'll say it again because some people tend to not understand this very well. Muscles don't understand which exercise you're performing. They don't get it. They don't understand the difference between a squat or a lunge or a leg extension. They don't understand the difference. They don't see the difference between, because they are simple mechanical mechanical objects, or rather they just perform mechanical tasks. They just do what they're told. They just do what they're supposed to do. They extend the knee. Now whether that requires extension of knee in a squat or in a leg extension, they don't get it, right? So from the muscles perspective, no such thing like, it is a rule, it is a must that the squat is going to be the end all be all of it, or the leg extension is not going to be the end all be all of it, or things like that. That doesn't apply, right? Just for the sake of clarity, I'm mentioning this. However, the benefits and the areas where exercises get separated and where one exercise becomes better than the other has to do with areas and with points other than just the muscle specifically. So when you're talking about, we understand the concept of compound exercises being better than isolation and being a better choice than isolation exercises whenever we have the option available, right? The only time we would use an isolation, whenever there is a compound exercise available, we would do that over an isolation, and the inclusion of isolation exercises would come when, or would be necessary when you don't have a compound exercise available for that function, or if the inclusion of of an isolation exercise is necessary to completely target and to completely and with balance increase the strength of a certain muscle or across a certain function. We have that clear in our mind. But the reason for that is not to do with the muscle specifically, but more to do with the additional benefits that compound exercises have to offer, whether it's in terms of bone density, whether it's in terms of training how to get a better carryover into day-to-day life and functional performance, whether it's to train the support structures around that joint, not just the muscles specifically, so the tendons, ligaments as well. We've got training the muscles that are responsible for maintaining stability in that unsupported compound movement. So there are multiple reasons that have a significant benefit to offer over isolation exercises, which is why we do them, right? So I want you to keep that distinction in mind. From the point of view of the muscles, it does not make a difference, but from the point of view of the greater picture, it does make a difference. So when you're going to choose exercises, we do have a laundry list of exercises when it comes to knee extension. Which ones are you going to choose for your program? It's going to be ones that do we have compound exercises for knee extension? Of course we do. We've got the squat, we've got different versions of the squat, we've got lunges, we've got leg presses. So when you have that, you would any day pick that over the leg extension. Then the need for leg extension becomes unnecessary over here, because there's nothing that offers that you can't get from otherwise. So if you were to pick the best exercises for the quadricep, what would it be? The first one I would recommend is the king of all exercises, like they say, the squat. Now, the reason why the squat, of course, is not just going to target the quadriceps, it's going to work the glutes as well. But again, that exercise has numerous things to offer besides just training the quadriceps, but it will serve that purpose too. So you're going to get more than just training your quadriceps. That is the only reason why you would say yes, pro squat. Otherwise, not really. But yes, so that's the reason why you would pick the back squat as your go-to exercise for the for the quadriceps. Now there are other versions of the squat as well. You've got people coming up with different funky versions. Some of them are fine. Some of them are not so good for practical reasons. Because it doesn't allow for continuous loading very well, and eventually you will run out of ability to load effectively, which will make the exercise pointless. And some are really, really silly, like the sissy squat and all that, but I'll leave that for another discussion. There's another version of the squat which is very popular, called as the front squat, and many people say that this version will help target the quadriceps better compared to the back squat. And the only the only point you would say that can actually agree with that, or say that that's correct, is because it would to some degree allow for a little bit more knee flexion in the eccentric, so greater range of motion across knee extension versus the back squat, a little bit more, and the movement is more dominant towards knee extension as opposed to hip extension. So a lot less bend in the hip, so it's more dominant or more dictated by knee extension. However, there's a trade-off there as well, because even though you're increasing the amount of knee flexion in the movement and range of motion across knee extension, you are still, ultimately you compromise the net load you carry as well. So the amount of load that you're taking is also minimized and limited compared to the back squat for a number of reasons. The first reason being that because the bar placement, the bar is placed in your clavicle in the front of your body, which is a much more tougher position to hold more weight compared to the back, where you've got your spinoscapula that really can stabilize and keep a lot of weight on top of you. The second reason being that because it's in the front of the body, it's going to challenge your core in a different way, which is another point I'm going to be discussing when I talk about front squats exclusively. So that I'll say that for another video. But a couple of reasons why, practically speaking, you get some and then you lose some as well. So can you really claim without a doubt that the front squat can target the quadriceps better? I don't think so. The reason for that being that even though you're getting a little bit more range of motion on across knee extension, or rather you're making the movement more knee extension dominant, not necessarily that much of a difference in range of motion, you're still compromising in terms of the absolute load. So you don't know where and what you're making that trade-off, right? But for the most part, a back squat for sure, and maybe a front squat. There's another reason to include a front squat, and I'll be discussing this, like I said, in another video, a separate video on it. But yeah, that's another perspective to include the front squat, not necessarily target the quadriceps alone, but that's another discussion altogether. So these two options are very, very good to consider. Another option that I would say would be an excellent option to consider would be a single-legged version compound movement for knee extension, such as a lunge or a step up. Now this has nothing to do with the quadriceps, it is purely to do with the glutes, and I've discussed this in my glutes masterclass, so you can check it out and understand the reason behind it. But because they are invariably tied together across a compound movement, knee extension, hip extension together, that is why this would also be included as a quad exercise or a recommendation for quads, because it's needed from that perspective, right? So check that video out and you'll understand exactly why I would recommend at least one single-legged movement, unsupported single-legged movement in your routine. Once you have these down, once you've got squats, once you've got lunges or step-ups, anything else really doesn't have much of a reason to include. The leg press will serve knee extension, leg extension will serve knee extension, but they won't give you as many benefits as, say, a squat or a lunge. So I would say as much as you can, get more volume. If you're looking for more volume, get as much as you can through these movements, through the back squat, the front squat, and any form of single-legged knee extension based movement or a compound movement like the lunge or the step up. If you still want to increase a little bit more volume and you're really going with something, depends on perspective, it's not necessary for everybody, but in some cases it may be relevant, then you can consider adding a leg press in there too. Leg extensions, the problem with leg extensions is that there actually has been a lot of controversy regarding leg extensions, and therefore a certain reason there is a safety concern there, but that's also a topic I'm going to be leaving for another separate video. I probably should have done that video before this. It would have been easier for you to watch, but I will be doing it very, very soon, so you can keep an eye out for that, and when I'm done, I'll link it in this video, so don't worry about it, right? Alright, so now we've pretty much taken a look at all the knee extension based exercises and really narrowed down, or not really all of them, but in theory we've looked at all of them and seen what would be the best choices to include when it comes to training the quadriceps, or rather in general how to program your training, right? It will cover training of quadriceps. Like I said, all of them will train the quads, but what matters is what does one exercise give more than just that. Okay, and that is going to be the basis on which we pick exercises. So this is the recommendation I've given you, and before, I'm not sure how many of you guys picked this up. I'm hoping that some of you guys did, but if you remember, when we talked about the hamstrings in the hamstring masterclass, I mentioned a point of the three heads of the hamstring that are involved in hip extension and knee flexion. So the biarticular heads, when they are in a compound movement, like you got your deadlifts or your squats, they are working simultaneously. They are working at the hip via hip extension, but they're lengthening at the knee via knee extension. So ultimately what's happening over there is they are entering into what's called they're becoming dynamic stabilizers in the movement, and they are not, and I mentioned that is not going to be enough to train them very well because they're movers. I mentioned this. I'm not sure how many of you guys picked this up, but isn't that the same thing that's happening with the rectus femoris? Isn't the rectus femoris also a biarticular muscle that is working for both hip flexion and knee extension? So if you talk about a squat where on the eccentric your hip is entering into flexion, your knee is entering into flexion, and the concentric, the hip is entering into extension and knee entering into extension, isn't the same thing happening at the rectus femoris? Isn't that during the eccentric portion, the rectus femoris is shortening at the hip because of hip flexion, but it's lengthening at the knee because of knee flexion, and when you're getting up in the movement, you are lengthening at the hip because of hip extension and shortening at the knee because of knee extension. Isn't the same thing happening here? Then why isn't that same principle applied? Why can we not consider that this muscle won't be trained optimally or won't be trained enough via compound movements alone? And this makes us think, is this really does this really call for a need for leg extensions? A lot of people had this question whether or not leg extensions have anything to offer for the muscles, of course, over the squat or lunge, and this can give us maybe some cause of concern for that, right? And this made me think for a while actually, and this is something that I'll admit that I was confused for a while a little bit. I really started thinking, and then the answer hit me. There is a specific reason why that concept won't apply here. So there we had a concept of, you must do, this is not going to do a very good job for them. Anyway, first of all, they're weak hip extensors, but even if, whatever they're doing, if they're working there, they're working as dynamic stabilizers in that movement, they're not going to be trained very well. It's going to lead to an imbalance. All these claims were made. Not in this case, for one simple reason. If you look at these three muscles, or even the hamstring muscles, or most of the muscles, or most of the skeletal muscles in the human body that we look at, they all run in a certain way. They are oriented in a certain way. They start with the origin. They are, bundles of fibers, of course, and they run down straight together and insert into their insertion, right? They all go from origin to insertion straight like that. And these muscles are called as fusiform muscles, right? These are fusiform type of muscles, and they all have this parallel orientation of their of the way they run. They just move from origin to insertion, and when they contract, they pull the insertion to the origin. It's very, very simple. Most of the muscles we've looked at are all like this, okay, fusiform. But what happens in the case of the rectus femoris? In the case of the rectus femoris, that is not what's happening. If you can actually see the muscle and you look at the anatomy of the muscle itself, it doesn't run that way. It doesn't run from origin to insertion straight like that. It is not a fusiform type of muscle. It is actually a muscle which is called as a pennate muscle, or more specifically in this, it's a bipennate muscle. And the reason for that is that if you see, it has a central tendon. Instead of running from one tendon to another tendon, it has a central tendon, and the muscles actually originate from the side from the middle and run outward. They don't run straight from top to bottom from one tendon to another. They are separating out from a central tendon and covering that area like this, right? So this makes it a bipennate muscle, not like the other ones, not like the three heads of the hamstring we discussed, which are fusiform. A special property of pennate muscles is that they don't really contribute much to the range of motion of a certain function they perform. What they do, however, is perform a lot of strong isometric force. They provide that way. That's what they do. They contract, they provide high force isometrically, but they don't really contribute much to range of motion. This is a property of pennate muscles, which the rectus femoris happens to be one. So, when you talk about a movement like a squat or a lunge or any of these compound movements for the lower body, essentially what is happening there is because there is simultaneous lengthening and shortening happening at both ends of this muscle, it is working as a dynamic stabilizer, and effectively it is contracting and it is providing force isometrically. And while that is not enough in terms of muscles for the hamstrings, which do the same thing, because they are fusiform, because they contribute to movement a lot more, to range of motion a lot more, it is not very applicable there. And if you depend on just that for training them, you're going to create an imbalance and weakness there. However, this is not the case in the rectus femoris, because that is the very nature of how these muscles are. They work in this fashion. They do not contribute much to range of motion, and their role primarily is to provide strong isometric force over there. So while that is not enough for the hamstrings to train them enough, this is going to be. So that confusion or that thought on whether or not, even despite the problems with the leg extension, is it a valuable, or do we need to include it for optimum development of the heads, or for a bodybuilder particularly, he would want that, or do we really need it from the point of view of preventing imbalances? And the answer is no, and this is the reason why. So even though they share the similar property, because this is a different type of muscle, it doesn't fall under that same issue. And that is why a compound exercise which trains it only via dynamic stabilization will still be enough, and especially when you're taking good heavy weights and higher intensities, so it's strong isometric contractive force required there, that would be more than sufficient to train this muscle based on its very nature, right? Alright, so I know that this has been a lot of information for you guys to take in, but hopefully, and this is probably, especially for those of you who've really not put that much thought into it, you'll be like, what? But this is really interesting from the point of view of understanding that there are different things that take place, and even though our questions may be really simple, the answers, and getting the answer to that could be a little bit more complex. We could have the same suggestion, you could have somebody else tell you that yes, you must just squat, or you must just do unsupported movements, that is more than enough. But providing reasonings behind it and understanding exactly why that is so will really help you clear out any doubts, and will prevent you from falling into extremist theories like that, or meaningless theories like that are based on emotion as opposed to information and facts, okay, or based on biases as opposed to information and fact. So really hope that this has conveyed that information for you. I have discussed the muscle, discussed its functions, discussed exercises that would be preferable to you to incorporate to train this muscle, and also that little bit of extra information for you guys, so you can understand maybe a little bit more in detail. Okay, I will have a quick summary posted for you at the end of this video, so you can brush it up quickly. I really hope that you guys found this video informative, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and comment below, let me know what you guys think about the video. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask me right there. I will definitely answer them. I do my best to answer as many comments as I can, and that's about it, guys. If you like I said, by the way, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you find this video interesting and you would like more videos as well. The videos that I do are long, but they're informative, and once you watch them, it's an investment of time, but once you watch them, you would definitely have topics cleared out for you completely, right? So once again, guys, thank you very much for all of your support, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.
Hey, thank you for watching that video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And finally, to watch another video, click right over here.